Does this thing go inside or outside your jacket? See, we don't have these in the insurance business. You let everybody in. You know, everyone's a potential victim. 8 November, where is it? Oh, there it is. 8 November 1975. The place is Riga, Latvia, and it's 0200 hours, and something very unusual is about to happen. The date of 8 November is significant. It comes after 7 November, even in the Soviet Union. And that's the day on which they celebrate the October Revolution. The reason, of course, it's in November now is because they switched calendars after the Bolsheviks took over. Now, the unusual thing that's about to happen is that there's a missile frigate, a Krivak class FFG, sitting at the city dock named Storoshevoy. The name means on guard, I believe, or vigilant, win some, lose some. The supposition is that the senior officers aboard the ship since the previous day was the Russian 4th of July, got into there celebrating just a little bit too heavily, as Russians have been known to do, and were passed out drunk in their staterooms. And selected members of the crew took advantage of this fact to initiate what they hoped would be a trip to Sweden. Now, the mutiny, oddly enough, was led by the ship's political officer, the Zampolit. That's sort of a chaplain for atheists. His name was Captain Third Rank, or Lieutenant Commander Valery Mikhailovich Sablin. As the ship's political officer, of course, he's the fellow who's supposed to make sure that everybody aboard does what it says in the little red book, or whatever the hell color book it is over there. Unfortunately, as the Marines say, this guy was not entirely with the program, and he, one other junior officer, and an unknown number of petty officers lit up their turbine engines, slipped their mooring lines, and split downriver. They almost made it. They were extremely unlucky. The first thing that went wrong for them was that one of the conscripts aboard, of course, the Soviet Navy and the Soviet Army don't really have career enlisted people like we do, which is probably a bigger disadvantage to them than their inferior hardware. Anyway, one of the sailors looked around and quite sensibly realized that he didn't want any part of this action. So he jumped overboard and swam to shore. Tried to flag down a car, but nobody would stop for him, presumably on the assumption he was just another drunken sailor. Finally, he finds a public phone, drops his Kopek, calls into headquarters and says, "Look, guys, something really bad is going down. I can't tell you what it is over the phone. For crying out loud, send a car out to pick me up." They hung up on him. Walks all the way into Baltic Fleet headquarters, finds a duty officer, says, "Look, Storoshevoy, if you send a jeep down to the city dock, you're going to find a 440-foot empty space where my ship used to be." And they thought that was remarkable enough that, sure enough, they sent a jeep down, or the Soviet equivalent thereof, down to the city dock, and there was a 440-foot empty space where the ship used to be. And they looked at each other and they said, "Nichevo," and didn't do anything else about it. By this time, Storoshevoy is out in Irgun Sound, boogieing along at maybe 25 or 30 knots. Her objective was the Swedish island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea, a run of about 300 nautical miles. The Soviet Navy really just let things fester for a while until finally the last piece of bad luck happened for Captain Sablin. One of the officers aboard the ship hadn't evidently got drunk enough, recovered consciousness, got into the Radio Shack, and sent out an all ships broadcast in the clear, "Mutiny on Storoshevoy, send help." That got their attention. Commander Baltic Fleet got on the phone to Commander-in-Chief of Soviet Navy, Admiral Sergei Georgievich Gorchkov, who evidently was recently given sort of a dishonorable discharge from the Soviet Navy. At least the notice in Pravda didn't say, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," just "Admiral Chernovin has the job now." Gorchkov probably told Commander Baltic Fleet rather pointedly to get the ship back. So an all-out air and sea search was laid on immediately. They already had a patrol force sailing around in the Baltic, and some Bear Ds were sent up to go looking for Storoshevoy. Well, of course, it's virtually a law of physics that ships can't run from airplanes very well. They found the ship in very short order and notified Baltic Fleet. And then they relayed a message from Baltic Fleet, roughly as follows: "Just bring the boat home, guys, and everything is cool." Well, Well, Captain Sobling wasn't quite that stupid. He did not acknowledge the broadcast and kept heading west. Finally, the order had to be given to disable the ship, and some fighter bombers attached to the Soviet Navy were ordered in to just to damage the ship enough to stop her. It's an expensive thing to put in the body and fender shot. So, unfortunately for the Russians, however, the lead ship in the surface pursuit force was another Krivak. Yeah. First thing that happened is that they blasted hell out of the wrong ship. Well, they finally got their act together. They scored ahead on Staroshevoy's stern, disabling the rudder, forcing the ship to stop 30 to 50 miles outside of Swedish territorial water. The surface pursuit force caught up. They took everybody off Staroshevoy and towed the ship back to port for repairs. Soon thereafter, the entire ship was sent all the way around the world to Siberia. The ship is now based at Vladivostok in the Maritime province. Presumably they did this on the assumption that the ship itself would be sort of a psychological contaminant for the rest of the Baltic fleet. Yeah, you don't really think of the Russians as being that spiritual. It's Captain Sobling, of course, was taken to Moscow, where the following spring he was given a fair trial and a fair hanging. In all fairness to the Russians, mutiny is a crime that navies historically regard as being fairly serious. And the reason we have the Naval Academy down in Annapolis is because of a certain irregularity in procedures aboard a United States brig named the Somers in 1843. Well, all this information, or at least some of this information, hit the papers in the winter and spring of 1976. It was a slow developing news story for a number of reasons. For one thing, reporters are basically incompetent, but for another thing, it was about a mutiny on board a Soviet ship. But you're supposed to laugh there too, but I read it in the Washington Post. I read that every day, mainly so I can get the far side. And I thought, gee, that's an interesting story, and why don't I just sort of file that one away, which is basically what I did. And it just sort of sat there and gathered dust. There's a lot of dusty things back here for the next 4 years. In 1980, my life took a fairly major turn. The one thing is my wife and I purchased the insurance business, which we still continue to operate. Actually, I'm going to be in there tomorrow. I couldn't get out of it. And I also joined the United States Naval Institute. In April of 1980, I just took an afternoon off from the office and I went up to Annapolis to go to their annual members meeting, or as I call it, a love-in. And what happens there is they give out awards and things, but mainly what happens is you have a lot of naval officers and their wives, or essentially naval officers too when you get down to it, talking back and forth with each other about how important the Navy is. I mean, this is like listening to a discussion of gun control at this trap and skeet club. You know, it's so you have people trying to disagree with each other so that they can subsequently argue on the things they already agree on. It struck me as a fairly pointless undertaking, and I sent a letter to the Institute the following September just to describe the fact that I thought this was a fairly pointless undertaking. Well, a week later, I got a check for $35, and Saul of Tarsus was not more surprised when he was knocked off of and onto his ass than I was by that check. Somebody actually paid me for writing something. Insurance companies don't do that. They respect my letters, but they don't pay for them. And I thought that was so remarkable. I didn't even cash the check for another year. And the following year, I came up with a really wild idea for a basing system for the MX missile. As a matter of fact, it was almost as crazy as what the Pentagon came up with. And I shot that into the Institute, and they liked it and said, "We'll rewrite it and send it back." And along the way, I made the acquaintance of a naval officer working in the OSD, who gave me some good advice and a couple of interesting comments. And he was a nice enough guy about it that I invited him down to the office for lunch just to sort of thank him. This was the Monday after Argentina seized the Falkland Islands. This is important. Keep track of that. So what happened that Monday is this fellow spent 10 minutes telling me how the Brits were going to take their rocks back. And he turned out to be right in just about every detail. I mean, that's what they pay him for, right? And then he spent about an hour giving me sea stories. Now, of course, if you're in the Navy, you don't tell sea stories. They ship you over to the Marine Corps. So what I really learned was, what kind of a person is it who drives submarines for a living? This is something I didn't know. I always knew that looking up the technical stuff for Red October to be fairly easy. What I did not know is what sort of person it is who goes to sea in a ship that's supposed to sink. Because that would bother me, And what I found out was that submarine drivers are a lot like fighter pilots. They wake up in the morning and adjust their halos. And when they go to sea, they don't really expect so much to walk on water as they expect the seas to part in front of them. So with this new and interesting knowledge, I decided, well, by God, writing a book is something I've wanted to do since high school. And I'm just going to sit down and do it. I really got rolling, I guess, in August of '82. And by October 28th, I had maybe 300 pages of manuscript done. So October 28th, I remember the day because somebody insured an Allstate whomped my car. I went up to Annapolis and I had lunch at Reardon's Saloon with a guy named Marty Callahan. He's the fellow who edited my MX article. And I told him I was fiddling with a novel and I wanted a professional to look at what I had done to tell me if it was any good. So he said, sure, he'd come down and look at it, which he did on Veterans Day, November 11th. Is that a holiday here? I mean, it's a federal agency and all that, but anyway, he read 2 chapters and he said, this isn't bad, why don't you finish the book? And I said, okay. And so I restarted from page 1 and ultimately finished the manuscript on February 27th of '83, about 3 or 4 months later. It wasn't as hard as you think. For one thing, there was an NFL players' strike, and my wife was pregnant, so my nights and my weekends. So my nights and my weekends were fairly free. On February 28th, '83, I walked into the Institute after making a business call, handed them 723 pages of manuscript, got in the car and drove home. What followed was probably the most difficult couple of weeks I've had in the last 10 years, because I didn't really know if they were going to like it or not. One of the things you don't have as a writer, one of the things no writer can really do, is evaluate his own stuff. I can't. And so I waited 3 anxious weeks for him to tell me that they had taken my 723 pages of manuscript and stamped it onto a roll and hung it in a small room. In fact, a lovely young lady, she just got married. It's Debbie Estes now, the acquisitions and rights editor. They're all the same at the Institute. They're all tall, they're all skinny, they're all gorgeous. It's disgusting. They're all married. That's the disgusting part. Said that she really liked it and could I rewrite the whole thing. The original manuscript was farmed out to 2 submarine officers. One of them just made captain, the other one's a commander now, who read the thing over for technical material. And it turns out I made a lot of stupid little mistakes, but the big stuff held together fairly well. Unfortunately, one of the officers told the Institute that the book should not be published for reasons of security. So I invited him down to the office and I showed him where I got all my information. I'll whip that out in a little while. And I finally persuaded him that I got all my information innocently. The one thing that he was really worked up about was something called Crazy Ivan. Now, for those of you who don't know what Crazy Ivan means, the Russians are a very paranoid, xenophobic bunch. And for some reason, their ships and submarines, when they're out at sea, on those rare occasions when they actually sail, they have this nasty suspicion that the United States Navy's submarines are tracking them. Now, in fact, when the U.S. Navy submarines are out at sea, they're conducting oceanographic research, which means, of course, don't you believe Oppo too? Which means they're counting the whales for Greenpeace. But because the Russians are so paranoid, they've developed a sort of a stylized turn, their version of the Williamson turn, in which they reverse course and race back on a reciprocal heading. And this in the U.S. Navy, on those rare occasions when a submarine is in the general vicinity of a Russian sub, calls the Crazy Ivan turn. Well, the captain was a little annoyed that I knew what that was, and I told him that we have a nuclear power plant down where I live, and some of my clients work the tea kettle. And one of them had just, I honestly couldn't even tell you which one told me this, because I have insurance for maybe 7 or 8 of them, and just told me what crazy Ivan was, and I just sort of filed it away and used it. Well, finally I convinced him that I had gotten everything innocently, that nobody had burned information to me. But finally I said, look, if there's anything in the book that should be taken out for reasons of security, even though I acquired all the information innocently, tell me what it is, and it's gone. So he turns around and looks at me and says, I'm not going to tell you what it is, you dumbass, it's classified. Now I ask you, what am I supposed to do? I mean, does classification even overcome being honorable? Answer, yes. Anyway, he withdrew his objection. The book went through the editing process. The editing process is rather like being in a dentist chair for 3 months. An editor is someone, it's like the doctor you take your kid to for the first checkup, and he says, well, Tom, he's a perfectly good boy, but he'd be so much better off without his left arm. My editor was a gal named Connie Buchanan, tall, skinny, gorgeous. I'm not kidding. Her husband was an All-American lacrosse player at Princeton, still plays club lacrosse, so I couldn't get too snotty with her. The other problem was she was 4.0 Princeton and a Marshall Scholar to Oxford. Now, even for a guy who went to a Jebbie school, that's Jesuit for you people who don't know, that's kind of intimidating. So the editing process is actually kind of Stone Age. You know, they take pencils and they make marginal comments and deletions and crap. And you get fed up with it after a while. I mean, it's just like somebody putting tattoos on your baby. So I made my own little comments, you know, GDC. God damn it, Connie. Oddly enough, we finished, the editing process lasted almost 3 months. And we actually ended up good friends, which is fairly remarkable. In the meantime, I got my first look at a U.S. Navy submarine, USS Whale. I'd never been aboard one before, not a nuke anyway. And the book finally came out in October of '84, 2 years ago. 2 years and 2 weeks ago, to be exact. And it looked like the book was going to do fairly well. The average first novel sells maybe 5,000 or 6,000 copies in hardcover. And it looked as though Red October was going to peak out at something like 50,000 when something kind of unexpected happened. There's a gentleman on the Washington Times, not the Post, the Times, the Mooney one, named Jerry O'Leary. He's a retired colonel of the United States Marine Corps, who belongs to the Institute, got the book, read it, liked it, and fortunately he was too cheap to buy one for his friend. His friend is the American ambassador to Argentina, Frank Ortiz. Well, he found out a certain lady was heading down there, and he asked if she'd take the book down with her and hand it to him. She said sure. Well, it's a long flight from Dulles to Buenos Aires, and she read the book, liked it, came back, bought a case, 28 copies. She's my #1 fan in that respect. One of which found its way under the tree of President Reagan. Well, the president, I guess it was a nice quiet Christmas in the White House. The president read the book in 3 days, liked it, and was kind enough to tell Time magazine that for all those cheap people out there that got the paperback, four kids, you know. You've noticed the comment, the perfect yarn, Ronald Reagan. Well, that's how that happened. Immediately after that, the hardcover jumped onto the Times list. The hardcover was there for 29 weeks. The paperback was on for quite some time. It just popped back because of Red Storm. And also, the president was kind enough to invite my wife and me to the White House, where the first time we met him in the Oval Office. And the next week, we were there for the arrival ceremony and the state dinner for His Excellency Raul Alfonsín, the President of the Argentine Republic. Now, take note of the fact that the process of getting the book started began with a discussion of the Falkland Islands War, the Brits, and the Argies. The book gets to the president because the right lady happens to be flying to Argentina, and 2 of the 3 times we go to the White House, it's also to meet the president of Argentina. And people wonder why the Irish are superstitious. Technically, you know, the book was actually quite easy to do. My sources, well, I had one piece of help from a federal employee. As a matter of fact, a person who worked in this very place. I don't know which building, it was around this complex somewhere. for whom I have insurance. He called me at exactly the right time. Makes you believe in fate. Sic volvere parcas, as Virgil used to say in the Aeneid. I needed to know something in Russian. So he called me. He called me up at exactly the right time to ask a question, an insurance question, and I got that out of the way real quick. I'm actually fairly proficient at it, or I used to be. And I said, "Do you speak Russian?" Silence. I'm talking 5 seconds of nothing but electronic noise on that telephone wire. And finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. He said, "Why do you ask?" And I said, "Well, I need to know how to say something in Russian. I'm writing." He knew I was fiddling around with a book, and I said, "I need to know how to say Red October in Russian. Is it Krasny Oktyabr or Krasnaya Oktyabr?" Silence. Finally, I guess I can tell you that. It's Krasny. That's the only assistance I had from anybody in the intelligence community. And I hope did he break any rules to do that? That's good. Because he just got promoted too. But the principal sources for my information were 3 books and a war game. The books are Ships and Aircraft of the U.S. Fleet, Guide to the Soviet Navy, Combat Fleets of the World, all Naval Institute Press publication. This is kind of incestuous. And this is the main source of numbers right here. It's a war game. It's called Harpoon by Larry Bond. I met Larry in '82. I bought this was advertised in Proceedings, and I figured for $9.95 you couldn't go too far wrong, even when I was poor. So I got to know Larry fairly well. He's my son's godfather. And I've ripped it up to put it in a ring binder so it's easier for me to use. But what it essentially is we have 2 books here. This is book 1. You can see how thick and hard to read it is. And this is just fundamentals on the game mechanics, and therefore on the mechanics of how ships and weapons operate. It describes little things like convergence zones. It took me about a half hour to figure those out. And really just a primer on how ships and aircraft function. I mean, how they do their thing mechanically. Also, what happens when weapons hit them. Book 2, excuse me for a moment, is divided into 2 parts. Part 1, oh, that's one too, huh? Part 1 lists most of the important ships in the world. Let's see, somebody pick a ship. Come on, somebody pick a ship. Coral Sea. Okay, she's in here. That's a carrier. CG-42, I believe. You settle for Midway. Sister ship. Type CV, number and class 2. State and service 1945, speed 33 knots. Displacement, standard displacement 51,000 tons, propulsion steam, crew 4,591. Total weapons mounts 11. That's 3 NATO Sea Sparrows, RIM 7H, 3 Mark 15 Phalanx, Seawist. I got one of those on my tie. Makes a neat sound. And of course a bunch of airplanes and things. Range, roughly 18,000 miles at 12 knots. This is the equivalent of $5,000 worth of reference books. Okay, for $9.95. The price is $11 now with inflation. That's the ship and aircraft portion. Now the actual weapons and sensor portion, let's see. Air-to-surface ordnance, USA, HARM. That's the high-speed anti-radiation missile. Effective range, according to this, 10 miles. A PK of .85, a weapon warhead of 70 kilograms. 14 damage points, that's if you hit a ship with it instead of a radar, which will 70 kilograms of explosive will probably do a job on a radar antenna, right? And hanging weight on the aircraft of 354 kilograms. So, and this is all public stuff. I can be sure of that because Larry is an officer in the Naval Reserve with a 1630 designator, and if he was burning classified information to anybody, he'd be in the gravel business now, right? Keeping Pollard company. So this is the sort of stuff that's out in the open. And all I did was take the information in that book and abstract it and just essentially use that as a database while I was doing the hard part. The hard part is taking 700 pages of blank paper and filling them up with words. Everybody makes a big deal about the research. Research is not only the easy part, it's the fun part. With Red Storm Rising, which began, for those of you who read the book, I mean, in the beginning, it tells how all that happened. Larry was down at my house for Tommy's first birthday party and said he was fiddling with an idea, and we just kicked some ideas back and forth. Finally, we shook hands on the deal and said, hell, why don't we write a book? It's turned out all right. In the research for Red Storm, I got down to watch an Air Force fighter squadron go through its paces with a scramble and everything. The Navy let me spend a week on USS Gallery, FFG-26, an FFG-7 Perry-class frigate. That was an awful lot of fun. Long time between beers, though. The Army let me go up to Aberdeen, drive and fire an M1 tank. Where's the state trooper when you really want one? The book I'm working on now, Patriot Games, I had 2 weeks over in England. Dirty job, but somebody had to do it. And a couple weeks ago, I was at FBI training center at Quantico. I watched the hostage rescue team go through their paces. The interesting thing about that, by the way, is that before Buck Revell, the Executive Assistant Director Investigations, FBI, gave the brief. There were some folks over from Italy who were also there for the demo. And he said that the difference between the FBI, HRT, and Delta Force is that FBI, they're cops. They're designed to use minimum necessary force, preserve evidence, if possible, arrest the perpetrators, whereas Delta Force just goes in romping and stomping and kills everything in sight. Then we saw the demo. Then we saw the HRT do the demo. And they're firing, they have a hostage room with 2 live human beings, volunteers, the idiots, one of whom had a target here and a target here, sitting on a couch. He's the guy who grades the exercise. If you kill him, you get an F. The good guys blow the door, come in, firing live rounds. I'm watching this from scaffolding overhead. I'm firing live rounds, pop all the targets twice, rescue the good guys, and the exercise is complete. First of all, the guy on the couch has a much higher coefficient of trust in his fellow man than I ever will. Secondly, if that's minimum force, I can only conclude that the Delta guys use nukes and then sift the ashes. And then just sift the ashes for the good guys. The book I'm working on right now is called Patriot Games, and it's those of you who read Red October, if you take a close look at Chapter 4, you'll get a feel for what it's about. It's Irish terrorism from the victim's perspective and also from an American perspective, which is kind of unhappy business, is one of the things I've learned lately. I had a fellow in my house last Thursday night who's over in the U.S., sponsored by USIA, to get the word out on what's really happening over there. His name's Colin Ian Gardner, and he's the Chief Superintendent with L Division of the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. That's the cops in Northern Ireland. He's been shot in the back with an American M60 machine gun that was purloined from a U.S. National Guard armory, which is not something for Americans to feel happy about. He's lost a lot of troops. The bad guys over there may have red-eye missiles now, which is making the helicopter drivers a little nervous. And one of the things I'm trying to figure out now is how the situation got to where it is and how it is we've been so lucky that it hasn't happened here. Well, I'll tell you, and I'm going to try to be a little serious for the moment, just how lucky we've been in the United States with terrorism. The problems in Northern Ireland go back to, the modern problems began in 1922 when the Brits established the Stormont Parliament, which took care of local government, local taxation, the police, the courts, and all that stuff. Essentially what happened was Ulster is a state in the same sense that Maryland or Pennsylvania or Alabama is a state within the UK. Now, but the UK doesn't have a federal government in the same sense that we do. They do not have a written constitution. They don't have an FBI. They don't have a Department of Justice. The thing just sort of, they've never really needed it because the country has always been governed on a fairly unitary basis. Well, in the 1960s, of course, we had all the civil rights activity in the United States. And we all remember that pretty well from watching the Huntley Brinkley half-hour news show. And the people in Northern Ireland, the Catholic community, watched the same TV coverage and said, hey, we got the same problems that the black folks down in Alabama got, and why don't we demonstrate too? So what began in 1965 in Northern Ireland was, for all practical purposes, civil rights demonstrations with the same objective. The people wanted economic equality. They wanted the right to vote. They wanted access to decent housing. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? The other thing that sounds familiar is the local cops, the RUC, and the local powers that be in the Protestant community didn't want to share what they had with the Catholics. And so the civil rights demonstrations had the same thing happen over there that happened over here. The demonstrators got beat up real bad. Sometimes the cops assisted, sometimes they just acquiesced, stood by, and cheered on the bad guys. Now, when that happened here, when Bull Connors got a little bit out of control in Selma, Alabama, and when Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi, what happened? Somebody in Washington by the name of Hoover, he might not have been the nicest guy in the world, but he was one hell of a good cop, got together with the Attorney General and said, we got to do something about this. They had the authority under constitutional and statutory law to send people down there and go to the local cops and say, you guys aren't doing your job professionally. And we're going to show you how to do this. And when we leave, you're going to do it the way we did. They solved the Goodman, Cheney, Schwerner murder case. They got Bull Connor under control. They reestablished the rule of law. Okay, that's because we got an FBI, we got a written constitution, we have a Department of Justice, we have civil rights laws. The Brits didn't have that ability. Things were out of control over there because the RUC wasn't doing its job right. They are now. It's a good police force now, but it's too late now. The only alternative the Brits had was to send in the army. British Army's a good army. They got good officers, they got good NCOs, they got good training. They're good folks. They're not ogres, but they're not cops either. And cops and soldiers don't mix. Cops keep the peace. Armed troops make the peace by killing everyone who's not peaceful. Okay? So if anybody ever asks you if we should get the Navy and the Army and the Marine Corps involved in stopping the drug business, remind them what happened to the British Army in Northern Ireland. A, they failed. B, they made things worse. C, it probably wasn't very good for the troops either. What's happening over there now is pretty grim. We've got 500 or so members of the PIRA, the Provisional IRA. They're committed Marxist-Leninists. And if they win, they're going to convert Ireland to another Cuba. As someone who likes to drink Irish whiskey, every time the communists take over a country, Cuba was importing tobacco a couple of years ago to make cigars, right? I don't want to see Ireland having to import whiskey. They're not really very nice folks. When I was over there in the end of April, beginning of May, there was a trial in Old Bailey No. 2 for the 4 folks that set the bomb off in the Brighton Hotel that almost bagged Maggie Thatcher. They didn't know she was going to be there, but they wouldn't have minded either. They looked very ordinary. You expect people like that to have horns and tails, particularly since the C-13, the anti-terror branch of the Metropolitan Police, bagged them just when they were getting ready to embark on a project that was going to explode a bomb a day for a month all over England in various hotels, trying to hit the tourist trade. You expect them to have horns and tails. Actually, they look very ordinary. One of the girls was cute enough that if I were of college age, I might have asked her out for a date. Her idea, however, of political expression is to blow people up that she doesn't even know. And unfortunately, it looks like that's the common thing in the world right now. Wars are just too expensive in monetary terms, in terms of the damage they do to the country that starts the war. I mean, it's a matter of history in the 20th century that almost every time a country starts a war, it loses. I mean, ask Hitler. So. But on the other hand, terrorism, you can deny you had any part of it, as the Syrians are doing right now, and you can. But if it works, you can still get your message across, and that's an unhappy fact that's going on right now. And one of the things I'm trying to bring out in Patriot Games is the primary defense against terrorism. People like you. The name of the game is intelligence. We've got the FBI hostage rescue team. They've never rescued a hostage. They make a hell of a good SWAT team. We've got the deltas if it's outside the country. They're all ready to go, but they don't know where to go. Somebody has to tell them what's going on. Somebody has to tell them where to go do their thing. And it's people in the intelligence community who do that. You people are the first line of defense of the United States of America. And if you have trouble explaining that to your family, get them a book on the Battle of Midway, where people in the crypto business, if they didn't win the war for us, they probably shortened it about 4 years. And that's how important you are. If we can develop information on the terrorists, we can stop them. We may even be able to kill them. Or if the FBI has its way, you put them in front of a jury, convict them, and send them to prison forever, so you can take, you just to use them like critters in a zoo. Interestingly enough, that guy from the RUC is against capital punishment. He says it only creates martyrs, and he'd rather keep them in cages as trophies. And say, see him? That's a terrorist. And we're not even, he may die of old age or cancer or something, but we're not going to kill him to make him a martyr. But like with everything else, what it's all about is information. When Heinz Guderian invented the Panzer Division in 1932, the first thing he put together was the radio network so that information could come in from the field to the commander, out from the commander to the regiments to tell them what to do. And that's the importance of you guys. So at this point, when I run out of things to say, we open the floor for questions. And the last time I was here, speaking in this auditorium, I had a hell of a time getting good questions. Now, when I spoke at CIA, on the other hand, I had a great time. So let's clear up a philosophical point. At CIA, when they introduced me, they said the talk was unclassified, which of course it is. And they said, if you ask questions, please keep questions unclassified also. Well, after I got home, I started thinking about that. I mean, I went to Loyola College up in Baltimore. I have a Jesuit exposure to philosophy and logic and everything. I have concluded that there is no such thing as a classified question. There can be a classified answer, but there's no such thing as a classified question. So please, ask away. All my information on the stealth fighter came from 4 paragraphs of copy in the media. So two paragraphs in the Baltimore News American, paragraph one paragraph in 2 separate articles of Air Force Magazine, in which they said that there probably is a stealth type aircraft, and since they can crate the thing and put it on a C-5 out of Burbank and take it over the hills to Nellis, that told me it's probably a fighter. Okay, so now what we have is a stealth aircraft of fighter size. What are you going to use it for? Obviously, you're going to use it for something that's too dangerous for other airplanes to do. Weasel. It's a fighter plane, therefore, it's going to have some air-to-ground capability and some air-to-air capability. If nothing else, you're not going to put an Air Force pilot in a fighter that can't shoot something, right? I mean, otherwise they'd take the scarf and goggles away. So based on that information, I just abstracted it. Okay, what is the most dangerous mission in the Air Force right now? It's Weasel, the guy who goes looking for SAM sites to take them out. I mean, this is like, trying to kiss a porcupine. So I just took it from there, and then I said, well, if it'll work against a SAM radar, what is a real Air Force mission? The Air Force likes the drama. They like the stuff that you make a movie out of 5 years later. So let's try something that'll really stomp the Russians hard at first and get the air superiority if they want. So I put Operation Dreamland together, based on just my concept of what a stealth aircraft would be used for. Whether or not I'm right, I don't know. But I can tell you this. Somebody involved, somebody who consults to a certain aerospace company, which of course he couldn't tell me, but it was Lockheed. He didn't tell me that, but I sort of figured it out. Got an early copy of that chapter, The Frisbees of Dreamland, and ultimately made 60 Xerox copies that were passed out at that aerospace company, and that tells me something. If the project goes white, I just hope they call it the Frisbee. That would be Tom Clancy's mark on history. We call that airplane, which probably isn't really the F-19, but whatever it is, call it the Frisbee. I'm not that stupid. I mean, it's only the last 10 years this place admits it exists, right? No, there's obviously, NSA is involved in signal intelligence of one kind or another. And I also figured, from my reading of naval history, the Battle of Midway and all that, I realized that the most important thing in a military environment is tactical intelligence and being able to read the other guy's mail, which is why I said on TV recently that when that Yankee went down, I have this evil impulse every morning when I start work in my office to call Woods Hole, Massachusetts and find out if Dr. Ballard's in his office. Because we didn't develop that technology to look at the Titanic. And maybe he's going to send Jason Jr. swimming inside. There's a nice big hole in her hull now, that Yankee boat that went down. And just send Jason Jr. swimming down that hole looking for the crypto room, maybe get a hold of a code machine and drag it out. I mean, I realize nobody here really thinks in those terms, but I do as an author. So, now the first thing you take off that Russian submarine would be the crypto gear, right? You guys don't even nod. That's good. Your security officer ought to be proud of you. That's what I'd take off first. I think that's probably more important than the nukes, so we know how to make nukes. But my information on NSA comes exclusively from a few things I've read. I've got the biography of Friedman, the guy that named this hall after, and a few other things. So it's really just a matter of using your head. There's so much talk right after Red October came out that people are leaking information to me. Why can't they just give me credit for being smart? It's not that hard to figure out. And it shouldn't be, because what's the mission of the U.S. military? What's our primary mission today, where the rubber meets the road? It's deterrence. It's keeping a war from happening. If a war happens, somebody's screwed up. We can't deter the Russians if they don't know anything about us. They got to have something to be afraid of. Think about it. If our nuclear weapons were a secret, why would they not start a war? So the problem you got to draw, and this is in a book by Jasper Holmes called Double-Edged Secrets examines this issue rather closely, is where do you draw the line between the importance of a source of information and the importance of making use out of it? If something is so important you can't use it, it's not even intelligence, it's just a piece of data that's in somebody's file. That's something, and this is something, another issue we're going to be examining in Patriot games from both sides. That if you're too scared to use a piece of information for fear of exposing your source, you might as well not have the source. So the question, and it's the same thing with military secrets and military performance. Where do you draw the line? The line's got to be there somewhere, but we got to expose a certain amount of information to the Russians if deterrence is going to work. Now, where you draw the line, I'll leave to the professionals in this audience. But you can't make everything secret. Otherwise, you may boomerang on yourself. The reason it was written up that way was because of the perspective from which the book was written. Really, the Russian perspective was from Alexiev, his point of view. He was exclusively commanding Russian troops, and his main concern was with the performance of Russian troops. As a practical matter, I'd really like to know just how much political reliability the Soviets tag on their East Bloc allies. I mean, today is the 30th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution. I mean, they were shooting back and forth at each other. Okay, think the Soviets trust the Hungarians? It's for damn sure they don't trust the Germans. The Russian-German semifinal's been going on for quite a while. You think they trust the Poles? Remember, trust in the Soviet Union is something about as rare as beef. So whether or not they'd use them, I don't know. I tend to say they'd probably minimize their use just by virtue of the fact that the Soviets are simply not trusting people, and all of their East Bloc allies have rebelled against them at one time or another. The Czechs have, the Hungarians have, the Germans have, the Poles have. You trust people like that to fight for you? It's something you want to think about once or twice. The U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy have effectively adopted me. Last Tuesday, I was down at Norfolk, and I gave the Trafalgar Night speech to the Royal Navy community. Here's the program from last week. It's a good speech too. That afternoon, Admiral Macaulay, Comnav Surflant, invited me into his office, and I asked if I heard Battleship Iowa was in town. He says, "Want to go see her? Let's go." And I spent 2 hours crawling around the battle wagon, so yeah, they like me. both the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy. They've really made me part of the family. I'm very, very proud of that. First of all, I would not go to that point. If somebody gave me classified data, I'd probably call the FBI. At the very least, I'd burn it. You know, I went to a Jesuit school. They make you take a course in ethics. That's, you know, it's wrong, okay? I'm not a reporter, for God's sake. I don't need classified information. Well, the reporters always screw it up anyway. Here's an example. The most classified thing I've ever seen in the news. It was almost a year ago, I guess. It was a front page thing on the front page story in the Washington Post. It was about a British security officer who worked at Cheltenham, the British counterpart for you guys, who was writing a book about how screwed up the security was there. And the third paragraph in the story said that security was particularly lax on a joint US-UK program to track Soviet boomers, or Soviet missile submarines, from their daily radio transmissions to base. Then, of course, then the story went on to something else. I'm thinking, Soviet boomers make daily radio transmissions to base? What? Our guys go out there, even the Pentagon doesn't know where they are. They're somewhere in this great big area about the size of the state of Georgia, which moves. The whole area moves. Nobody wants to know where they are. That's the whole point. I'm thinking, the Soviets have them, ET phone home every day? So I know a guy in that business, and as luck would have it, I had to give him a call anyway about something. And I told him this thing in the Post, and he said, say that again, repeated the whole thing. That was in the paper, huh? Yeah. What day? What page? Which told me a lot right there. I said, come on. Nobody's that dumb. I mean, nobody would have a missile submarine broadcast every day. And he said, well, just maybe consider that different people have different ideas about the way you do things. But the reporter burned that information, did not even know its significance. That's probably the most secret thing I've ever read. And of course, it was page 1 of the Washington Post, so it's in the open now. But no, using classified information, no way.